we live in a strange time. Here we are, we carry the entire world around with us in our pocket. Our social media feeds are flooding us every day with more perspectives than we know what to do with. Yet rather than this incredible interconnectivity helping to expand our perspective, understand each other better, and bring people closer together, it seems to be having the opposite effect. Our minds have become more entrenched and more polarized than ever. Our culture more fractured and fragmented. And we seem to be burning more bridges these days than we are building them. As a result, conversations are breaking down. Empathy is breaking down. Our capacity to enfold with each other is breaking down. The spaces between us have become colonized by social media algorithms that exploit our cognitive biases and directly influence what we perceive, how we think, and how we view each other. And the results, I think we probably all agree, have been kind of disastrous. We see these corrosive effects just about everywhere we look. We see it in our politics, we see it in our media, and sometimes even here in our own integral community. Many think that this state of affairs really only has one outcome: increasing conflict, which some fear may even spiral into something like civil war. But my guest today, Stephanie Lepp, is pointing us towards a different path. A path where all this polarization and fragmentation represents an opportunity to rekindle our connections, to deepen and expand our meaning making, and to reinvent the lost art of conversation. In her Faces of X media project, Stephanie's basically role modeling a different kind of discourse, one that's based on mutual respect, good faith, humility, and genuine curiosity and other perspectives, all of which have become such scarce resources in today's attention age. This incredibly well-produced video series is doing something really extraordinary, I think, and something that's deeply resonant with the integral heart. It's encouraging us to reach across the divide, to open ourselves to new points of view, and without compromising our own deeply held principles and dignities. And perhaps most importantly, Faces of X invites us to notice that all of the conflicts that we're seeing out there are really taking place in here. They're taking place in our own minds, in our own consciousness, in our own relationships with each other. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy and in our mental models of reality. And Faces of X, I think, can help show each of us what we might be missing. So without further ado, let's welcome Stephanie Lepp to Integral Life and see how Faces of X can help us move beyond division and maybe a little closer towards empathy and understanding. Stephanie, how are you? It's so good to have you today.
It's so good to be here, Corey. Thank you. I've been really looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. And, you got in touch with me, probably about maybe a year or so back when you were just, I think, beginning to kind of formulate the Faces of X. And it's so cool to see how far you've come since we talked last. I have to say, I find this video series to be just really, really impressive. And I'm looking forward to spotlighting what you've been doing for our members. So, yeah, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
So where to begin? There's any number of places to begin. I think maybe it would be helpful if maybe you kind of take the mic for a couple minutes and just explain to our audience what Faces of X is. Let me just say, when I first heard the title Faces of X, I thought someone was finally paying attention to my generation. And then I found out X is more like a variable that can, for different topics. Hey, we're overlooked again. We're used to it at this point.
I'm with you.
But yeah, so maybe you can share some of your, original sort of creative impulse to work on the series in the first place and to bring it into the world.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's a very simple, the impulse is actually pretty simple. It's just if you wanted to help people transcend binary thinking, right? Red or blue, woke or anti-woke, what would you do? How would you do it in like an internet friendly way? Faces of X really is just one answer to that question. And so it's a series of short videos that integrate different perspectives on culture war issues, including capitalism, abortion, gender, and race. So this is really kind of showing, not telling, integral.
Yeah.
And the
You
format
started
is very
with the
simple.
easy ones, I can see. You started with the easy ones.
Yeah, keeping it light, keeping it light. Well, actually, I mean, then October 7th happened. So, but I'm not touching, Israel just yet. But The format is actually very simple. I use the Hegelian triad of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. It's the same person playing all three, per your point about this also exists inside of us. So it's the same person kind of steel manning the thesis and antithesis, kind of both sides of the issue. If we're going to kind of simplify it into two sides, which of course many issues have many sides, but we're just simplifying. And then synthesis, which again is the same person in another outfit, walks in and attempts to do an integration. And perhaps in our conversation we can talk about how synthesis or integral is different from centrism and is different from both sidesism and is different from heterodoxy. But yeah, but just for the introduction, the format is in some ways kind of painfully simple. You mentioned something about a second simplicity. It's like the simple on the other side of the complex. But I do think that the synthesis has some richness to it. The series stars cultural influencers who are known for being independent thinkers, like Liv Bory. If you're familiar with her, she's an expert in game theory. She's stars in Faces of Capitalism. Buck Angel stars in Faces of Gender. But I guess I would just say ultimately Faces of X is not really about the individual issues, right? It's ultimately about cultivating our capacity to integrate different perspectives and gain a bigger picture, not just of politics, but ultimately of reality.
It's beautiful. It's beautifully said. And let me just say, they're so the videos are a lot of fun, and we'll be playing all of these videos for the audience right here in this episode. But they're so fun. They're so well acted. I mean, that was really what kind of jumped out at me. I was like, this is not amateur hour. Like, you really put together a really, really cool sort of constellation of people to have these conversations. And again, it's more like it's role modeling a certain kind of conversation that's become so rare in today's I refer to it as the attention age. And of course, with the attention age comes with all sorts of, let's just say, perverse incentives to divide rather than to unite, right? Where everyone is competing for the most clicks, for the most bombastic take possible, which is always going to be a caricature of what the vast majority of people are actually walking around with in their heads and in their hearts. And there's just so many, again, just incentives in the social media system itself that is straining, I think, sort of the overall cultural and interpersonal fabric of our culture, of our sense of betweenness, right? Of our sense of being in this together.
Totally.
It's hard to know sometimes how to go about fitting these radically different, often conflicting perspectives together into this higher synthesis. And you do a really great job, I think, of demonstrating that.
In no small part, thanks to you.
Yeah, I
I
appreciate
drew
that.
very
Say
liberally
more.
from integral. I mean, that was, I can say just kind of generally, informally, integral very much informs my, I used to call myself a promiscuous, pragmatic pluralist until I learned the word integral, and I was like, so much easier, one word instead of three. So
But
it's
you
very,
lose the alliteration. Alliteration
you
is
do,
cool.
it's
So
true, it's true. That is nice, yeah. But so I guess kind of just like generally informally, it's very baked in. But yeah, integral life was absolutely the first place I started with each issue, kind of looking for references. And many of the people that I got, I very deliberately asked for feedback from people with very different perspectives on the issue. But some of that, when I was looking for more of an integral perspective, so yeah, Keith Martin Smith gave feedback on Faces of Gender,
nice.
Cindy Wigglesworth on Faces of Abortion. So yeah, integral life is absolutely kind of like all over and that is part of my intention with this project and my work in general. I see myself as a little bit of a translator. I take dense, somewhat undigestible material, and then I make it not just digestible, but hopefully delicious for a much broader audience. So for that reason, these videos are painfully short, right? I had to very much condense, but I hope that they are, and as a lot of my work, a gateway, right,
Yeah.
to the longer form content and material that very much informs them. So yeah, hopefully I'm sending many more people to Integral Life.
Well, I deeply appreciated. Thank you. I think a lot of us agree that we need to be seeing more integral influence being exerted in the world, and I think that happens, not around us, but through us and through people like yourself, and taking up projects like this in order to more skillfully communicate really the gems that come out of integral. And you're right. I mean, integral's a tough gig because the on ramp is just so steep, right? It's a very steep on ramp. Oftentimes it's like, hey, what's the best introduction to your site? Well, read these 3 massive Ken Wilber books and get back to us in 3 years when you've had a chance to digest it. And it's really tough because I often say integral, in a certain kind of way, suffers a bed of nails problem. We have a lot of nails. Like, in other words, we have a lot of, I think, interesting things to say, but there's so many
Yeah,
of them that it's hard for any of them to really penetrate and to exert,
yeah.
meaningful influence in the world. So having someone like you who has the skills and the talent to sort of like, let's focus on particular issues and try to up level the conversation that we're seeing around those issues is one of the most wonderful demonstrations of integral, let's just call it skillful means that I can think of.
Thank you.
You're prototyping a new way of communicating this material, and that's exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, I would hope that then, and this has already happened, because then people are like, well, how did you do this? Right? Like, what's under the hood? And it's like, let me show you the bed of nails. Just kidding. Like, let me show you because there's a lot here.
Yeah,
Right? So, but it's like you got to get interested first. It's like,
that's right.
huh, I see kind of how you did kind of integrate these, seemingly clashing and contradictory views in a way that did give me a bigger picture of this issue. How did you do that? Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yep, totally agree.
yeah.
That's that. I think that comes right off of the screen when you're watching. So before I want to get into some of these videos, and start watching them. But before we do, I read a piece, a biography, or a description of the project where you were talking about some of your own experiences. As an activist, you had some experiences in the
Uh,
realm of activism. I think a little bit early on in your life that sort of led to this. It led to a number of frustrations, and those frustrations, it sounds like, culminated into this project. Can you talk about that a little bit?
sure. Yes. So, yeah, it was my first kind of real experience with activism. Um, which was completely alienating.
Mm.
I was a freshman at Stanford, and I went with the Redwood Action Team at Stanford, acronym RATS, to this is like my first week of freshman year. We went to a city council meeting in Mendocino to protest the logging of the Northern California redwoods. And at the time, an activist named Julia Butterfly Hill, some of you may remember her, was living in one of those redwoods. And so, we're at the city hall, we're like outside, getting ready to go in, we like call her on speakerphone to her tree, and she gave us a pep talk from her tree, like to us there outside protesting, waiting to go in. So it was all very exciting. But I noticed something strange. I noticed that the people who we were protesting against, the loggers and their families, just looked like very humble people, right? They
Mm.
they looked mostly like migrant workers from Latin America, and I just thought to myself, like, I don't really want to be on the opposite side from those people. I want to be on the same side as the trees and the people. Right?
Right.
Just the way these lines are drawn does not make sense to me. I didn't know anything about sustainable development at the time, but I just knew that the way these lines are drawn doesn't make sense. And
Mm.
that kind of confusion kind of like marked the end of my involvement with rats, and really kind of the end of my involvement in politics, and the beginning of kind of this a fascination of like, how might we redraw the lines to get more of us on the same team, right? So that did kind of mark the beginning of my fascination with integrating different perspectives. And so in some ways, and like it's like it took becoming a promiscuous pragmatic pluralist, and then kind of discovering integral for me to then come back to politics with a way to redraw the lines, right, and get more of
Mm.
us on the same side.
That's great. No, it's a great story, and I think it's something that has become just so common with activism these days. Is that it is sort of almost out of necessity. It's partial, and it's usually the product of what we later realize basically sums up to a number of false choices that we're presented with. Like I said, it's the people or it's the trees, right? It's wokeism or it's MAGA. It's racism or it's anti-racism. So we're giving this set of binaries, and
Yeah.
we don't see a lot of conversations, asking whether these are the appropriate sort of choices to be laying in front of people. And I think
Yeah.
people oftentimes feel a little bit trapped. So it's like, well, I don't agree with everything that this side is doing, but I'm attracted for some reason more to this side than to the other side. But there's this piece of sort of undigested meat in our hearts that we don't quite know how to digest, because our hearts are big enough for both sides, but we're not seeing
Totally.
that being expressed in either of the sides. Right? It's either
Yeah.
all peanut butter and no chocolate, and your heart's like, well, I want a little bit of peanut butter in my chocolate. I want a little bit of chocolate in my peanut butter, right? A little bit of yin in my yang.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, so that's another thing that's really coming out of this video series. I'm watching these actors, brilliant actors, just playing these roles, and it really does. It feels like they're in the room with each other. There's a real sense of interpersonal conflict. But of course, as you say, these are the same actors, so it's actually sort of representing the interior, the personal conflict that
Yeah.
all of these issues, all of these life conditions, all of these really wicked problems and global challenges, cultural challenges, are erupting within us at least as much as they're erupting out there. And you do
Yeah.
such a good job in this. I think another piece that we see of this, and we'll talk about development a little bit later in our conversation, but it's another thing that I find myself talking about a lot. Is here in Integral Land, we love our maps of development, right? Like I've got a page I made a while back that looks at each stage of development using film clips and video games to sort of illustrate the qualities of the stage. It becomes such a natural part of integral thinking that I think we take for granted the fact that the vast majority of people out there aren't running around with developmental maps in their heads, right? There's nothing telling people, oh, this was a green thought. Oh, this was an amber thought. This was an orange thought. It's just it's just thought in a certain sense. And that thought might be guided by principles or values that we might identify at any of these stages, but really, when people are expressing their political beliefs or their frustrations or, taking whatever role that they play in these culture wars, you're going to see this big mix of stage expressions that are coming from their own developmental stack. And I think that this can be confusing for a lot of people who maybe go into activism, for example, because they have these really bright, vibrant, idealistic green values, and yet they go to the protest or whatever it might be, and they see these beautiful values being expressed in, let's just say, not very beautiful ways. It can often turn
Yeah.
into its own kind of absolutism. It can turn into its own kind
Yeah.
of us versus them, or either or thinking. And what you're doing in this
Right.
video series is you're creating a breadcrumb trail that's leading people out of exclusive identification with either or thinking and into something more like both and thinking. And of course, we need to remember that both of those are part of a polarity. We're not saying that
Yeah.
both and thinking is always better than either or thinking, because that would
Totally.
itself be an either or statement, right?
Totally. Yeah.
But it's about developing a certain kind of wisdom and a certain kind of perspectival agility that allows us to
Yeah.
recognize when one is maybe more fitting for a context than the other. And honestly, just a lot of people in our culture don't have a lot of training in this kind of both and thinking,
Yeah.
which is just another reason why I get so sort of jazzed by this project.
Capitalism is the most powerful prosperity-generating force ever known. I think you mean the most extractive force ever known. It has lifted billions of people out of poverty, expanded access to food and literacy, It's effectively created our modern world. It has caused the extinction of hundreds of species and decimated countless traditional cultures, extracting resources faster than anything that came before. Okay, but the market is genius at driving innovation. It gives us the economic freedom to buy, sell, and compete in ways that make society better off. How can you call it economic freedom when the most affordable food is diabetes-inducing junk? How can it be genius when life-saving drugs aren't fast-tracked because they don't generate enough profit? Listen, if you want to grow the pie, the name of the game is capitalism. The game of capitalism is rigged. Who cares about the size of the pie if it's so unevenly distributed? Honey, size always matters. Plus, what's the alternative? Would you want the government managing our food supply or setting drug prices? Sure, capitalism has its problems, but it solves them through innovation. And it's just the best economic system we've ever known. Okay, but innovation can cause more problems. There's a paradox where innovations in energy efficiency often make us use more total energy, which is a huge problem if that energy isn't clean. Criticizing capitalism doesn't mean pushing for socialism. What it means is being realistic about the fatal flaw of unchecked capitalism. In its pursuit of profit, it fails to fully account for its costs. So we have an existential crisis on our hands when arms races are counted as economic growth. A tree is worth more dead than alive, and people are worth more outraged and addicted than conscious and free. An economic system that doesn't fully account for its costs eventually self-destructs. Unchecked capitalism is destroying the entire playing field. Whoa. Guys, chill. Look, everyone loves to pit capitalism against socialism, but most modern economies are mixed. They combine the decentralized intelligence of the market with the stabilizing force of the state. But ultimately, capitalism and socialism share the same fatal flaw. What's that? They both prioritize one metric at the expense of others. Socialism prioritizes equality at the expense of freedom, efficiency, and innovation. Capitalism prioritizes profit at the expense of equality and sustainability. Capitalism has created the most prosperity in terms of overall wealth, but if it keeps deferring costs to the future, it risks humanity's capacity to play any game at all. So here's the thing. Capitalism is the most extraordinary engine of economic growth we've ever seen, and its benefits have not come for free. Thank you. It's not that capitalism is evil, it's just partially blind. It's great at maximizing profit, but that comes in part by externalizing costs. And those costs have always been high, but now they're getting globally existential, which means it's time to change the game. And now we increasingly can change the game because of capabilities that capitalism enabled us to build, like, for example, closed-loop production systems and platforms for decentralized coordination. In other words, capitalism has brought us to a terrifying but also miraculous point at which humanity must change and is newly able to change. Perhaps our next economic system, which is just the next one by the way, can take the best bits of capitalism and evolve beyond it. Perhaps we can reframe the debate from capitalism versus socialism to economic systems that only prioritize one metric versus economic systems that actually account for more of what we truly value. And for sure, we can always integrate more perspectives. Our view will probably always be incomplete, but we can always strive to see more faces of this hyperdimensional shape that is reality.